This is the Niles Essanay Silent Film Museum presentation of a special webinar called Spotlight on Limelight and the Circus. And I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First of all, we have Eugene Chaplin, who is the fifth child, excuse me, of Charlie and Una Chaplin, the first one to be born in Switzerland in 1953. And I'm very glad to welcome Eugene to our community of the Niles Museum and worldwide Chaplin community to our panel today, because Eugene has had a distinguished career, although you may never have heard about what he's done, because he's worked kind of behind the scenes, very much in the central performing arts world. He went to RADA and studied stage management and did stage management for, among other companies, Balanchine's ballet company and opera companies, and worked for a few years doing that. And then he became a sound engineer, and he almost immediately was working with the likes of David Bowie and the Rolling Stones, helping on their albums. And what makes him particularly wonderful that we're able to all have him here with us today is that he became the artistic director of Circus Knock. Am I pronouncing that right, Eugene?
That's right. Yeah.
Circus Knock in Switzerland, and a position that he held for 8 years. So literally, and I wondered, we're not going to open up questions yet, but did they hire you because you had the rolling dustbin and the outfit from City Lights that Charlie uses to clean up after the elephants? And was that your real function with the Circus Knock?
No, well, I stayed. I didn't have any costumes. I had one made at the end for the 2 last years, because I used to close the show up, turn up and just thank everybody for turning up and everything.
Really? So, what kind of costume did you have made?
A friend had it made for me. It was more or less a black suit with golden embroideries right down it.
Aha! So you look more like an usher than the cleanup man of the walking behind the elephants. You weren't required to clean up after the elephants then.
No. I was quite lucky because we didn't have any elephants.
I see. Well, and then since that time, of course, I know you have also been working with Circus, helping to organize and judge circus festivals around the world while we had a world to go around, unlike now when the earth is standing still, the day the earth stood still forever. Thank you for being here with us, Eugene. We also have Mr. Hooman Mehran, who you have met, who's spoken to you briefly with our housekeeping. Hooman is going to be doing our behind-the-scenes organizing of the Q&A and other technical aspects of this. Hooman is a distinguished Chaplin aficionado, as he likes to call himself, and scholar who has had many great insights over the years from his study of Chaplin, and in fact, many of which reached print, including 2 books. One was about the great dictator, a book of essays, collected essays, which Hooman was, along with Frank Scheid, the editor of a book of essays on the great dictator, and more relevant for us today, a book of essays called Chaplin's Limelight and the Music Hall Tradition, a series of essays by scholars and participants in that film. So welcome, Hooman. We also have Nigel Dreiner, who's a musical theater artist, who's noted for a Wonderman show he developed on Al Jolson, in which there is no dubbing. He sings Al Jolson, a talent that, if things lag today, we'll certainly ask him to share with us. We also have Jason Allen, who is speaking to us from his son's bedroom outside of Toronto, Canada. And Jason, although you won't, he's doing older Chaplin today, is really the Billy West of the modern age. He got very noted by doing a series of one-man plays and ingenious videos as Chaplin's character, as Chaplin's Tramp character. And in the course of that, he's done festivals in India and commercials in Japan, and has traveled the world, things for Russian oligarchs, and I'm sure he'll tell us about his criminal underworld connections before we're done today. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was pretty clear.
Yeah,
Alluding to my criminal world. Thanks. That's
you're very welcome.
Beginning.
And we also have Rena Keene sort of in the background. Rena is, of course, here because she and David Keene are the Niles Essanay Silent Film Museum and have organized a world center for the restoration and preservation of the great Essanay Film Company legacy. And among their other productions is this blanket, which is behind me. It's actually a blanket, not a virtual background, featuring all you Chaplin buffs will know, that is a poster, a reproduction of a poster from the Champion. And if I go up with my computer screen, you'll see the beautiful Essanay logos. In my opinion, Essanay is in the running for most beautiful movie posters ever created, and they have a nice collection among the other valuable, wonderful artifacts from this terrific museum. Welcome, Rena.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, I'd like to start by taking us back to 1921, when Charlie went to Europe for the first time since he came to America. It wasn't he'd been one trip back during his years touring for Carnot between 1910 and 1913, 4 years literally crisscrossing America and Canada with the Carnot Company, as almost everybody who's tuning in will know. And he came back in the summer of 1912, and he decided he wanted to return to America because he liked it there. And he stayed, and it was the next 10 years were very eventful, to say the least. He became the most famous star, the most famous person in the world, and then decided, after making The Kid and then cranking out The Idle Class in 1921, that he wanted to go home again. So it was the first time in a decade, and it was a world of difference. He could have walked down any street in England without being recognized except by one of his fellow performers, by and large, in 1912 when he was last there. When he returned to England, the crowds, I've never seen an estimate of the numbers, but when he got on the boat from the boat train and disembarked in London, the crowds were estimated to be comparable to those on Armistice Day in 1918, which would have meant, in the minimum, the tens of thousands, possibly even as much as 100 to 200,000 people. And he went in what can only be described as a triumphal procession, pressing through the crowded streets in a car with 3 policemen bobbies on the running boards, keeping the crowds away from the car, going very slowly through the streets to the Ritz Hotel. And he was hustled up to his room that had been reserved, and the crowds were cheering below. And he opened the window. There was a little balcony, like the Pope opening the window, and somebody had put flowers in his room, and he blew some kisses, and he began throwing flowers. And as he tells us in his book that he wrote about it on the way home, a policeman came up in the room in something of a panic and said, "Please, Mr. Chaplin, it is very fine, but don't throw anything. You will cause an accident. They will be crushed and killed." Peter Ackroyd, who wrote the most recent biography of Chaplin, relatively recent, came out about 5 or 6 years ago, simply called Charlie Chaplin, A Brief Life, has this to say, and I think it's very pithy, about what had happened to Chaplin in those 10 years and what was happening to him now. And I want to use this to begin our conversation. Chaplin had encountered, and indeed created, a wholly new phenomenon. The crowds had come out at the funerals of Dan Leno and of Marie Lloyd, but the fame now generated by the new medium of film was unprecedented in human history. No one before had experienced the amount of acclaim and even adoration that now swept over him. He had no preparation or training for it. He simply had to cope with it as well as he could for the rest of his life. I think that's very well expressed about something that we all have read about. Anybody who's ever read anything about Chaplin, any writer who writes about it, of course, has to grapple with the fact that he was one of the first. He certainly wasn't the first. There were other movie stars at the same time, comparable. Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, most of all, at that time. But for Chaplin, I think the affection, the adulation was deeper, and it lasted much, much longer. It was literally his whole life. And we're dealing with two films that, that in a sense, reflect upon that fame. So I would like to ask our panelists to start off with. We have the Circus, we have Limelight, and in a sense, they're both, well, let me back up, because I haven't thought this out very clearly. Chaplin himself didn't like it when people tried to interpret his films by trying to say that they were autobiographical, by finding the autobiographical elements in them. He allowed the film The Gentleman Tramp to be made somewhat with reluctance because the filmmakers, Richard Patterson and whoever they were, did a good job convincing him that it would be a good idea to have this particular documentary coming out at this time, and that it would be they would do it tastefully. But he felt it was reductive to try to interpret his films by his life. But everybody who writes about Chaplin, of course, writes about the fact that his films are autobiographical, almost right from the beginning, and sometimes transparently so. And we are dealing with two of the films that are the most overtly autobiographical, The Circus and Limelight. So I wondered if anybody wanted to kick us off by just talking about your own sense of how these films reflect Chaplin's own, or emanate from the realities of Chaplin's life. Anybody want to start on our panel?
Well, look,
Yes.
what I think personally is, of course, he was influenced by what he lived. He had a full life, and especially young life was very difficult, and I think he was very influenced by that. And he was a very sensitive person. So his sensitivity shows out in his film. But saying it's exactly autobiography, it's a biography of what he lived through, that I don't know. But apparently so. Maybe someone else can confirm. I was told that, well, he said in an interview that as for the circus, he had an idea. His very first idea was the idea of the tightrope and the monkeys on it, coming and attacking the tightrope walker. And he always thought that would be a great gag. And from that around, he built the whole story of the circus.
Anybody else want to add anything to that autobiographical thread that we're talking about here, which I think we're going to continue talking about inevitably with these two particular films?
Yeah, I think Eugene is absolutely right. It's neither film is autobiographical, although everybody always assumed Limelight was. I think most of the autobiography is subconscious. What he's dealing with in these two films is how difficult it is to make people laugh. I mean, he really, maybe admitting that he doesn't really understand what makes people laugh. In the circus, he only makes people laugh when he doesn't realize he's performing. And in Limelight, he can't make people laugh until literally the day he's dying. So he's puzzled by it, and he's frustrated by that. And I think that's what he's expressing more than trying to tell the story of his life.
Jason, do you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I remember studying Chaplin in the extreme superficial level on the outside of just how we're affected as consumers in order to portray him or to emulate his movements and things. When you go through his movies from beginning to end and repeatedly, you can see a major change in the way he tells stories and how his life probably progressed. Doing Limelight, obviously, and Circus, there was a tremendous amount that's happened to him that didn't happen to many people on the planet. So his storytelling and his creation was very different. And I could see the difference, how carefree it may have been at the beginning. Also, it was styles of film and storytelling. Thinking it was an autobiography of his actual life was an obvious thought when you're trying to get in his head as a character. And then other things you read might take you away from that opinion. You can only get that information from what you're given. The films are definitely the only gospel we have of Chaplin's real life and my autobiography book. That's all we really have. And anybody who happened to be there or knows him. So as a person trying to emulate his movements and get in his head, like I said, you certainly are led to believe that maybe that is part of his life, not most of it.
So we do have an eyewitness on that 1921 trip, and there were a number of eyewitnesses. He went to Paris as well as England, and the crowds were equally vociferous and large in Paris. And at one evening, he's taken to the Cirque Medrano, a popular circus in Paris, and the headline act that evening are the Fratellini brothers, a famous family that went back generations of clowns. And a wonderful story, one of the best early articles that came out on Charlie Chaplin was in the New Yorker, the first year of the New Yorker, which was 1925 or 26. And the article came out in May 23rd, 1925. So it was the interviewer, the profiles section of the New Yorker that in the first year were done under a pseudonym, Searchlight. We now know that the identity of Searchlight was a man named Waldo Frank, who was actually with Chaplin that night at the circus in Paris watching the clowns. Well, what happened is they came in late, they slipped in late, so they didn't cause a fuss and disrupt it. The Fratellinis are on, doing their clown act as the climax for the first half of the circus. Charlie gives this one half of a line in his My Trip Abroad account of his visit, My Wonderful Visit. It was called in England. And here's what Waldo Frank has to say. And I'm reading this again because I think these films are about the craft of comedy to some degree, but they're also about dealing with fame, a kind of fame that is unthinkable to the rest of us. We don't get tired, at least I don't, in contemplating this. It's very hard to wrap your head about the extent of this fame. And when we talk with people who don't know Chaplin, I said to somebody, he was the biggest star in the world, you know. And she said, no, he wasn't. Because we have now a glut on the market who's, we have, when the Kardashians can be stars or Paris Hilton, what does it mean anymore? But this was something new and different. And here's how he describes what happened at the circus. Nobody thought in Chaplin's party that anybody even noticed them coming in. It was hard to say if anyone, I'm reading it now, had remarked Chaplin's entrance, but the finish of the act was the signal for intermission. The high-tiered human monster suddenly shouting, "Charlot!" with 1,000 throats, avalanched down upon a single spot at the arena rail, where a little man in dapper dinner coat sat blinking. He was engulfed and lost. A score of gendarmes broke into the delirious maze of men and women, pressing on Chaplin as if they were hungry to devour him. The police formed a phalanx around him, and he was shuttled out into the Place Pigalle. But the cry, "Charlot," had got there first. The square, the boulevards that lead to it turned into a magnetized mob. The thousands came pouring, pushing, shouting. Men touched him. Women tried to kiss him. At last, with his London-tailored garments reduced to the state of a rummage sale in the Bronx, Chaplin was swept into a strategic taxi, and as the car maneuvered him into a side street and the voice of Paris shouting "Charlot" dimmed, he shook himself and smoothed his hat, and he said, "It's all nothing. It's all a joke. It can all be explained. I tell you, it's all nothing." The gods seem to be playing a sort of serial joke on him, and he's always behind. He's never yet caught up. The mob, the fortune, the fame, the intellectuals of New York and Paris turning his stunts into logarithmic mazes as if he were Einstein, the great of the earth, mysterious, hungry women. What sort of game is this anyway? Why do the rotten-teethed thousands of London weep and bash their fist in their faces when he comes to town? Why do the Frenchmen speak of Pan and Dionysus and give him decorations? "I'll find out," says Chaplin. He has not found out, but he has become a self-doubting, melancholy, haunted man, oscillant between gaiety and despair. He goes on seeking, and his quest slows his work, sicklies the pure lyricism of his art with a pale cast of thought.
You know, I've often wondered, 30 years later, when Beatlemania hit, if Eugene, if your father saw any of this footage of the Beatles in those same situations when they first became as big as they were in 1963, 64, if he ever saw that footage and thought, "I've been there," because that's about the only thing I can relate to when it comes to Charlie's worldwide popularity at that time was something like the Beatles. I know Pickford and Fairbanks, and there were stars here and there, but as far as a worldwide global phenomenon,
He, you know, when he was here, when he was in Switzerland, obviously, that was the past times. He never really talked about it. I think he admitted he was very surprised of his success, meaning that, you know, he was very focused and he worked very hard, and what was happening around him, maybe he didn't just realize that this, you know, his success was going to go global. So he was very surprised, of course, when he went to London and to the Ritz there. He was amazed about it. But, you know, he invented the right, he found the right person which everyone recognized themselves into. And we have to remember as well that a lot of those times, you know, you had the First World War, the Second World War, and all that. It was all troubled times. And he's the one with pantomime managed to laugh about those troubled times.
mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's why more or less everywhere people adored him, you know, and still now.
I don't think Nigel he ever reacted to Beatlemania, although he is on record as not having liked A Hard Day's Night. But he was amazed in the 60s. He did talk quite a bit about the crowds that surrounded the Kennedys, and he was quite amazed by that, and was talked to many interviewers about that phenomenon, but never about Beatlemania.
Interesting.
I'd like to suggest, though, that this writing by I've just taken a few passages from it. This wonderful article by Waldo Frank called "Funny Legs" has something to say to us about what the circus is about the very content, the heart of the circus. You know, again, Frank says he's become a self-doubting, melancholy, haunted man, oscillant between gay, you know, "I'll find out," and his quest, you know, and Frank says he has not found out. And the very core of the circus is that Chaplin is funny, but he doesn't know it. And I'm directing you towards some interesting, I'm speaking of you panelists and our participants, some interesting writing. This is a fabulous article, maybe a little hard to find. If you subscribe to the New Yorker, you can get it on their online site. It was published in a book of the first year of New Yorker profiles. There is another book I'll draw your attention to, which hasn't been published yet, is the unpublished memoir of Chaplin's co-star and collaborator in the circus, Harry Crocker. It's called, in the 1950s, after Chaplin left the United States, Crocker wrote a book on Chaplin called Charlie Chaplin, Man and Mime. It is an unpublished manuscript at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and I have some good news. It looks like that there is a publication project in the works for that very valuable book. And he talks about, Chaplin took him off literally into the woods to brainstorm for weeks and months at a time the plot problems of the circus. And it was one of the revelations of Harry's book, because he was very proud of it, is that it was Chaplin said to him, look, I have this idea about being in the circus, doing a film about the circus, and I want somehow to be funny to the audience, but I don't know I'm funny to the audience. And it was Crocker that gave him the idea that it's simple, Charlie, you're being chased, and you're so busy, avoiding the policeman that you don't know that the audience is laughing. And this is a central theme in the circus, and I'm going to throw something, maybe a kind of a curveball at you. Walter Kerr did not particularly like this film. Walter Kerr, in his wonderful book called the Silent Clowns that came out in the 70s, about 1/3 of which is devoted to a love letter and very perceptive analysis of Chaplin. But he felt that Chaplin had set himself a problem in the circus that he couldn't solve, which is that he feels the premise, never mind the romantic subplot, he dismisses that. He feels that the premise is that comedy is something that is created by accident. It's an accident when he's chased by the mule into the circus tent and has to avoid the cop. Or the first time it's the cop chasing him into the circus tent. And then subsequently it's an accident. And he feels that the scenes of him having to audition in the circus are not funny, that the audience being shown laughing uproariously diminish our laughter because it's not as funny. We don't think it's as funny. And this is something that other people have criticized the circus about too. And I want to get your reactions to what you think about. Chaplin, of course, as we know, didn't even mention the circus in his autobiography. And in an interview that he gave when it was re-released in 1969, he is visibly shaken. He's surrounded at the Manoir behind, which is a virtual reality behind the virtual background behind Eugene there. The reporters were right on the steps of the Manoir and gathered around firing questions, and he just sort of goes into his own zone and is clearly visibly shaken at the re-editing or the rejiggering he had to do to upgrade the circus for its re-release and write the music for it, at how bad he looked during parts of it. He says he's very specific. He said, my weight dropped down to 117 pounds. I lost 15 or 20 pounds. For a man who weighs about 130, that's a serious weight loss, and you can see it in some of the outtakes. And I want to tangentially pause here to say that you'll see those outtakes, some of those outtakes, in the new Criterion release of the circus, which contains a terrific interview by Eugene, in which he takes us around Chaplin's world, which is the conversion of the land and Manoir into a museum for the public, a very successful museum. But it shows outtakes in which Chaplin indeed does look, and in the existing film, there are certain scenes mainly when he's eavesdropping on Myrna, where you can see that he's very, very gaunt looking. And he got very upset seeing that footage again, and obviously reliving the stresses he was going through, which we can or cannot. But I would like the panel to address this criticism of the circus. Do you agree that the circus is not as good as his other silent masterworks, and especially in between arguably his two greatest feature films, silent feature films certainly, the Circus and City Lights? It's often considered a kind of as Walter Kerr says, kind of a pedestrian product of a comic genius at odds with himself. What do any of you think about that? Those criticisms about the circus?
For me, real quick, the circus was the last film of the big features that I had gotten to see, and it was because in the VHS days when I was still trying to rent all these films, no one had the circus, so I eventually ordered that, and that was the last one that I got. By then, I had read I read my autobiography, I read multiple other Chaplin books, so even before I put the movie in, I knew all the behind the scenes chaos that was going on. The Lita Gray situation, the tent getting destroyed, the fire, the film that he shot up on the tightrope walk that was no good. So because of that, it was more difficult for me to appreciate as a film, because in my head I was thinking about all of the stress and, like you said, the weight loss. And it wasn't until years later that I was introducing these films to a friend, and I put the circus on, and he loved it. He absolutely loved it. He said, "That's my favorite one." And I said, "Really, it is?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, I love that one. That was great. So from there, I kind of took another approach to it every time I watched it, and I was able to separate the backstage drama and enjoy it as a film. And ever since then, I've enjoyed it so much more than I did before then. So I thank my friend Jose for reintroducing me to a film that I had seen multiple times.
Well, thank you, Nigel. I appreciate your appreciation, even though you have not addressed my question. You want to address the question before I simply slap you and move on?
Well, you can go ahead and move on if you like. We'll give
No.
Eugene a chance to say something.
Well, any of you have a thought about this? This is a common criticism of the circus, is that there's a saggy part in that the criticism basically boils down to, look, he gets his job as the head clown of the circus, but he's unaware of it. And John McCabe, is one of the wonderful biographers of Chaplin, said, Charlie's a lot of things, but he's not a dunce. And Walter Kerr says, how come doesn't he hear the laughter every night when the mule chases him into the tent? So it asks us to believe that this is just happening night after night. He's a big hit, and he doesn't know it, and it allows him to then just focus filmically on his courtship and hopeful romance with the equestrian Myrna, played by Myrna Kennedy, of the film. Anybody else want to respond to that, or do you feel there are scenes like, for example, the audition scene that simply don't work because he set himself an impossible problem, which is he's got to be funny about not being funny?
Well, to me, The Circus is his funniest film he's ever done. There is more gags per minute than any other of his films, and even in the outtakes, he was that funny. There were so many funny moments in that film. When he had to cut the film, he had to cut a lot of those gags out as well. So, fine, I mean, I enjoyed that film. It's one of my favorites. So I enjoyed that film, and I haven't even noticed the loss of weight and all. Which is true. What I think is quite extraordinary is, with all the problems he had to make that film, he made one of the funniest films ever. And even the auditions are not the funniest, and I don't think they're supposed to be very funny. And no, okay, everyone has their taste and think what they like, but
I don't know. For me, it's so difficult to compare all the features because they're all so wildly different. They're all such different films. It's for me impossible. It just depends on, for me, what mood I'm in as far as what film I'm going to like more that particular day. There was a time where I didn't particularly care for the Gold Rush, and then a couple years later, I watched the Gold Rush again, and I loved it. So I think it's just a frame of mind thing. But as far as the critique on it not being funny, I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
I think the circus, I mean, it suffered for being unseen for 40 years and therefore was viewed as a lesser film. I think it is a lesser film. It doesn't rank quite as high as The Gold Rush or City Lights. And it's not because it isn't funny. I mean, Eugene's absolutely right. The first half hour of it are hilariously funny. He just isn't able to keep up that pace, possibly because as the production moved on, his personal life intruded. I disagree with Walter Kerr about the audition scene. I think one of the funniest things in the gags in the film is when the ringmaster tells him to go ahead and be funny, and that walk he does has me on the floor every time. So I think that's very funny. Maybe not so much the barber sequences, but the go ahead and be funny is hilarious, as is the half hour of the film that preceded it. And Kerr is also wrong. I mean, he's right in his overall assessment that it is a diminished Chaplin film. But he's wrong about the fact that it's not about Charlie not knowing how to be funny or not realizing that he's funny. It's about the audience being fickle. And that's exactly what Limelight is about too. He doesn't trust the audience. He always lived in fear of his audience abandoning him. In Circus, he's imagining it. He's anticipating it, I should say. And in Limelight, he's reflecting on it.
That's a really good point, Hooman. Eugene, I wanted to ask you the question because you're the only, I'd be willing to bet, including our participants out there, you are the only circus man among us. You lived the circus for many years. I mean, 8 years full time with the Circus Knock. And my question for you is, after you were so immersed in the circus professionally, and you literally knew the smell of the sawdust and all the other smells and wonders and horrors of the circus in your own skin, did it make you look at the film any differently? Because I know you've spoken of that you were helping when your dad was composing the score with Eric James from the circus. You would sometimes be the projectionist, which I think we'd like to hear a little more about in a bit. But did understanding the circus so deeply as a professional yourself alter your view of the film at all in a professional or technical sense?
I saw the film, of course, before I knew the film before. And the funny thing now, I'm talking about European circuses. I don't know how it is in the States or elsewhere, but in general, in European circuses, the general atmosphere which the film, the circus, gives you is spot on, and it's still the same now. The acts are more modern, the technology obviously is better, but the fight of every artist, of every clown trying to be funny, and if he's not funny, the management coming down and telling them off, or the management giving a fine because they're late coming on stage, or, you know, all this still happens now.
Yeah. Can I say about your earlier question, and to go along with that, Circus has definitely got a lot of humor to it. It's an award-winning film of his, one of the few of such a high award, and being able to pull out that many gags into one film wasn't something he was used to doing in such a large fashion. In the competition at the time, films were becoming bigger and better in production, and there was a lot to compete against. So the pressure was there, and that's all aside from what problems in his personal life were there. So to pull off such an amazing film, it's a testament to the exact same formula that that Chaplin's always done with all his films in that era. So his early things would pump out whatever was happening in that era. And we also have a benefit of looking down at all of these films and comparing them as if they were always compared. And you can't do that. And when I think, I don't compare Jim Carrey and Charlie Chaplin as in direct comparison, but their careers are somewhat meteoric as well. Where look at Jim Carrey films, they were the funniest things on the planet at the time. And there are a billion different attitudes about it now, and they've all changed. So the same goes for the Chaplin mega hits. The attitudes have changed over the eras, and I think aging of a film and aging of comedy and aging of everything, and even the pile up of what we know about the production of the film changes our outlook on it from this perspective.
I still believe that, you know, you can watch these films like Jason, you said all the Chaplin films are on Netflix in Canada. They're not on Netflix in the US right now, but I feel that in order to experience these kind of films, you have to see them in a theater with an audience. There's no other way. You can watch them on TV in your own home, but without that surroundance of laughter and that audience mentality, same with going to see a live circus. There are things that are going to land in a live setting with a live audience that aren't going to land the same way if you're in your recliner at home, you know, watching it on your television. And whenever I've tried to introduce these kind of films, whether it be Chaplin or Metropolis or any of these silent films, I always wait to see if there's a thing going on with the showing live at a theater. And I say, hey, everybody that I'm friends with, let's go see this. And they always have a very positive and very enthusiastic response to it, versus just saying, let's put on the DVD at home, because it's a completely different atmosphere. So I do feel that even in today's modern society, in today's modern times, Chaplin films still land very, very high if they're presented in the right environment.
It's especially a big problem. It's a big problem too for Limelight, Nigel, because there's no laugh track during the performance, and everybody asked him, said, "Don't you want to have the audience laughing?" And he said, "No, the real audience will supply it." Well, it's very strange now when you watch it on a Blu-ray or a DVD to just see these acts on stage with no audience participation. It's kind of an eerie feeling. So it's even more a problem for Limelight than for the circus.
Hooman, I think Alice Arts is out there, and she had a question. Do you want to?
Does she want to talk, or just is a type question?
Hands up.
Oh, okay. Let's allow her to talk.
Well, I find that it makes a big difference when the mindset of what you're going on, because the first time I ever saw City Lights was with a sort of a double date with a guy that I turned out not to much like. And I saw it on TV, and it didn't make any impression on me at all. And then I went and actually watched it, and of course it was a masterpiece. So I think some of the previous comments about what you're thinking about and how you're approaching the thing and what you're thinking about when you're watching it for the first time or the second time or any other time. I'd also like to say that I think Chaplin's films really are timeless, and they do hold up extremely well. And some of the ones when he did this little commentary and tried to make it more modern actually make it less modern. So just the original things, just the way they were, just absolutely work beautifully well, I find.
Thank you, Alice.
When you go to the circus, you don't go there to think. You sit down and you open your mind up, and you have emotions coming to you. There's certain things you like, there's things you don't like, but you go there, and it's not like a film where you can sit down and think about what they're saying or anything. It's really a place you go down and you let yourself dream and see these people work. And as for the rehearsal, the two rehearsal scenes in the circus, the only thing I wanted to say is those gags, I'm sure he saw them in a circus. They're typical clown, clown acts. And some of them are not hilarious, but they are what they are, and that's it.
Yes.
No, you're absolutely right, Eugene, about the William Tell act and the barbershop scene. Those are kind of run-of-the-mill things, but I'm just talking about that little routine he does before he goes into those established acts.
Well, folks, I would like to say that the reason I'm here tonight is two great gifts in my life, two great mentors artistically. And the first one was Charlie Chaplin. When I was in college, I saw my first Charlie Chaplin film. It happened to be The Gold Rush. And I walked out of the film into a different life. I was studying industrial design, but I had to be part of that world somehow. And by a stroke of amazing luck, there was a great mime artist who was a teacher in the drama department on my campus, Carnegie Mellon University, who happened to be a world-class mime artist. And the two things exploded in my mind because I realized, although this man was a stage performer who was in white face and tights, it was where silent movies had gone and was being done at that time. And so I became a performer. And one of the reasons I prodded you about your circus experience, Eugene, and how it might have affected your view of seeing the film The Circus is that my view of the films changed dramatically. I didn't love them more. I just saw them more clearly after I began somebody who tried to perform and create comedy myself. And one of the wonders of Chaplin's films is how he was a stage performer growing up, as we all know, from the age of 5, really, but professionally from the age of 9. But unlike most stage performers, he figured out a way to make his craft of comedy and movement into viable film. And one of the things that film artists can do that we stage performers really can't is to preview our product on the public. And Chaplin, as we know, did that from at least, he was probably doing it during the Essanay days, but we know it's documented that he would go to previews of the Mutual films and he would change them if things weren't working. They all did that. All the great comedians did that. Buster Keaton famously changed the entire ending of Seven Chances when the ending fell flat, but he heard people laughing as 150 women dressed in brides' costumes are chasing him because of the plot of the film, and it didn't work though. But he heard a laugh in the audience, and he didn't know what they were laughing at. So they went into the screening room, and they found that he dislodged a stone, and for a moment it looked like a stone on this hill he was running down was chasing him. And so they went back and they built stones, prop stones that were up to 15 feet in diameter, and one stone hits another, and causes an avalanche. So instead of the brides chasing him, it is an avalanche of stones that he's running from, and that gave the film one of the greatest climaxes of any of his films. Chaplin did that, of course, with his films as well, including The Circus. He did it with all of his films. We have some outtakes from The Circus, which we don't have a lot of Chaplin's feature films, because he didn't want us investigating how he was behind the scenes creating these films. And I want to draw everybody's attention out there to the fact that the new Criterion disc, I don't get any commissions from it, full of wonderful extras. The producer, Abby Lustgarten, of the Circus disc and all the Chaplin Criterion re-releases, went to Switzerland, went to the vault. Where is that, in Switzerland, Eugene?
Yeah.
And she found that there were 6 hours of outtakes from 2 scenes that were cut from The Circus. In the first of them, Charlie tries to impress Myrna after he's become a success at the circus and he has enough money to buy nice new clothes. He invites her to lunch with him. And to his dismay, as they're walking to lunch, because this is his chance to impress her with how suave he is, they come upon the tightrope walker that she has just fallen in love with and that he's busily trying to win her away from. And she impulsively invites him to lunch. And in the course of lunch, they have a series of mishaps. But I did a lot of research because I was asked to do the commentary track on this half hour of outtakes from what would have been about close to 10 minutes of footage. Kevin Brownlow, when he made his wonderful documentary, Unknown Chaplin, with David Gill, put it together. He had access to the footage, and he puts together a very reasonable cut of what he supposed Chaplin would do to put those scenes together. So again, my devil's advocate question for you, Chaplin experts up here on the panel, is the film as it is, The Circus, runs about 70 minutes. Had he added those that footage to it, it would have expanded it to about 80 minutes, which is much more of a conventional feature film length. With the addition of those two scenes, Chaplin never cut them, even at the first. He didn't put the scenes together himself. He didn't think enough of them. It happened while after the circus was burned down, and they built him an ancillary set. He went on location for the street scene where they're walking to lunch, and they built him a little cafe set, and they filmed it while the circus set was being reconstructed, apparently over a period of about 2 weeks. And it's just wonderful footage. Should he have included that? Certainly Rachel Ford, his long-term secretary, who you would have grown up with, Eugene, knowing, urged him. She tried to blackmail him. He said, Charlie, it's wonderful. Why don't you put that in? Please, please. And he actually began. I did a lot of research for this to do the commentary track for the Criterion. If I didn't mention, it's on a Criterion disc, by the way. I'm still in the lobby. She really tried to get him to do it, and he started at her urging because he really respected her opinion, but he gave it up before he did any actual cutting for reasons we don't know and we'll probably never know. So my question to you, expert panelists, is should that footage have been in the film?
I'll answer. I'll be the first one to answer. No, because he didn't want to.
Okay. That's spoken like a loyal son. And Chaplin,
Yes.
Eugene, I should mention to everybody, is also the Chaplin. You and your siblings, essentially the Chaplin estate is yours, and you have stewarded it and preserved and done what's necessary to keep Chaplin in the public eye very commendably. I think we would all agree, and we would all thank you for the great job you've done at preserving and the legacy and disseminating it out there, and not only for your own personal profit to earn money off it, but because it's the legacy that must be preserved because it's a world treasure. I thank you on behalf of everybody in the world. I thank you.
I got to go 2 years ago. We went to Germany, and we were about 3 hours from Switzerland. And I said, well, if I'm here, I got to go. So we took a little road trip about 3 hours, and it's just as incredible as you can imagine. I mean, it's where you grew up. So, I mean, I'm sure it has so many nice memories for you. But for me, you know, all the film clips I've seen and the Gentleman Tramp and all the interviews and all the dignitaries that were on the back lawn there, I'm standing there on the porch where all this happened, and it just felt completely unreal. I couldn't believe the mountains, you know, the background is just like the most picturesque thing I've ever seen. So you all did a fantastic job at turning that into something very, very special. And I can't wait to go back again someday. They had to kick me out. I think the museum closes at about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I'm standing inside the office, and there's this desk, and I'm trying to envision him writing my autobiography there, and I'm looking out in the mountains, and I'm just kind of in awe of the situation and where I am. And the girl comes in, she goes, "Sir, we're closing in 5 minutes. Would you mind?" I said, "Okay." But you know, I could go there every other day and I would have a great time. And it's just, I can only imagine the amount of work that went into putting that together, because I know it was quite a frustrating situation for a while, but at the end of the day, it turned out fabulous. And I hope it's a success for decades to come.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, another unsolicited testimony. Tickets on sale in the lobby. Anybody else want to address the question of should that footage be in the circus? Should Chaplin? It's a hypothetical question, because obviously nobody's going to put it in now. But the question is, should Chaplin have included it back then? Anybody have any thoughts? Jason,
yeah, I was going to say no right up until Eugene said, well, he didn't. So then I changed my mind. But no, absolutely. And the way Chaplin did things, the end result is our product. It's what we get and what we got. And it's his brain that did it. And there's very good reasons, and we really shouldn't have it explained to us. That's not our business. However, trying to be an expert in the industry of how to emulate or to work or to take the formula that he established and try and expand it, or to carry the legacy on, or to educate future generations, whatever it may be, you really wish that, why didn't we get that? My God, we could use more, because it's gone. We could use more now. And that goes for anybody who really affected us as a planet and as artists. We want as much as we can get. If we could just unturn every stone and see if there's any more information there, any more hidden films. There are novels written about it that way, fantasizing about new works from Chaplin that we've never seen before. Yeah, so yes, and it's not our business.
Thank you, Billy West.
He knew, it's one thing I do remember about him is he knew what he wanted to show. He knew what he wanted to talk about, like in his autobiography. A lot of people say in his autobiography, oh, he didn't extend, he didn't talk too much about his ex-wives and whatever. You know, I can understand that why people say that, but I think, you know, he tried to have the best final product ever. And maybe the only guess I have, he didn't put those scenes in. It's maybe the film would have been too long, or would it take a certain rhythm out of it? I don't know. I don't know. But, you know, that's it. To me, I think it takes a lot of courage to do that, because when you do a work and you think it's great and all, and then suddenly you decide to cut it down to make it even funnier or better, you know, what are you going to cut out? It's a big question.
Yes, and Eugene, so speaking of the work process, of course, for many people, well, Chaplin retired after Limelight. He didn't retire, he moved to Europe and Switzerland after Limelight, and then you were born, and Lord knows that must have been a full-time job for all concerned. And a lot of people think, well, he didn't do much else, and of course he did. He never stopped working, and you were a witness to the fact that he was what I gather, a fairly disciplined worker. He wrote the scores for at least a dozen films that had never been scored, all of his silent work that he hadn't done, everything before City Lights that he still owned, which was, how many films was that? That was 8 First National and Woman of Paris and Gold Rush Circus. Yeah. So 11 full film scores, hours and hours of music, a process that began before the silent era. I mean, before he moved to Switzerland, with scoring the Gold Rush, of course, and altering the Gold Rush to be a narrated film rather than a film with subtitles. But you were a particular witness to the soundtrack of the Circus. Could you share with us a little bit about what it was like were you actually running the projector while he was going back and forth working on the music?
When he was scoring his films, you know, for all these films, it was pre-video. It was before video existed. So the only way he could work, he had I guess he worked out first alone a few themes he kind of thought about, and then he would get my mother. My mother, would bring in the projector, which was a 16mm projector, and we would open up the screen in the living room, because the living room was quite big for that. And he had a piano there, and he would try to link his ideas to the picture. So at first, of course, things, you know, my mum would start off the film, and then he'd start to play on, then he would stop, and he says, rewind back. So you had to go slowly backwards, you know, put the projector into reverse to the beginning.
Ah, well, that was one of the questions.
Of whatever scene he wanted, and start it again.
So your mom or you were actually just flipping it into...
At the end, I did once, I think once or twice, when my mother couldn't do it. Yeah. But it was mainly my mother who would do it.
Yeah. Huh.
And
so was your Eugene, was your interest in the circus, was that something that you had prior to seeing your father's film, or was that the genesis of your interest in going into the circus field?
Look, going into the circus field is just pure luck. You know,
Okay.
I was doing all different things before. Of course, the circus film meant a lot to me afterwards, after being in the circus world and see how things are going, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Eugene,
no,
do you have any specific memories, Eugene, of the rescoring of the circus? Because you would have I don't, whether or not you were directly involved with the projector or with that big press conference that was held to announce the re-release. Anything specific?
No, that I don't remember, because it was, I guess I was at school at the time.
Oh, okay.
But I remember him working on it. I remember Eric James being there, and yeah, and what I certainly remember, because I didn't know the story behind it and all the hard, you know, how much he disliked the film.
Right.
Until he rewritten that, he did the music, he composed this music for it. But what I do remember is once we had a copy, 16mm copy of the sound and picture together, he was very proud. He really loved it.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you know that? What do you remember him talking about it, or just?
For the number of times he showed it to us as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eugene, you also have some other insider information about Charlie and circuses, because I know that he was very regularly a very regular guest at the circus. Is it pronounced knee or knee?
Knee.
And so full circle here. We've still got a goodly amount of time to go, but full circle in terms of the Waldo Frank eyewitness description of what happened with the Cirque Medrano when the crowd went, I mean, literally went dangerously nuts and was, really tearing at him in their enthusiasm, in their love for him. Now, what I presume by the mid-50s, when you were going to the circus with your family, and of course he was a resident in Switzerland, so it wasn't like going around in Hollywood. You know, he wouldn't cause the stir that he would cause in, suddenly making an appearance in Paris or London for the first time in years. But what are your memories of how the crowd and the circus people reacted to your dad as you were a child growing up?
Well, the first thing you have to explain is Switzerland is very quiet. Switzerland, the Swiss people are very shy people. Once they get to know you, it's okay, but they're very shy people. So that's why my father loved Switzerland so much, because he could walk down to town and go and get the newspaper, and people will look at him but never bother him. And in Switzerland, everything was very well organized. So when he went to the circus, the place was packed because everyone wanted to be there at the same time as him. But
How
they
did
left
they know
him
that he was
alone.
going to come on a certain day, Eugene?
They knew that 90% of the time, it's when if the circus came to Vevey, he would appear there. And on a Saturday night, of course, because the circus would only stay 3 days. So no, it was nice, and it was always a big happening because he would take all the staff, the house staff as well. So the house staff would lock up the manoir, and everyone would go down. And then, of course, I remember when Noel Coward would be there, and James Mason would be there, and it was like a big reunion. And you'd go to the circus. And my father loved it. And I think he loved it as well because he felt the return of love which the artist gave to him. All the clowns were desperate to meet him. And practically all the artists would at that point. So after the show, my father would invite the whole cast back up to the house for a drink. And it was marvelous because, well, to me, I was a shy boy, and seeing these artists doing incredible things and all, you saw them and you just realized they're normal, down-to-earth people, very nice. Plus, the next day on the Sunday, if we were lucky, like an animal trainer would come up with a bear into the garden and show his bear, or a crocodile or monkeys. And we had all kinds of animals turning up. So, it was good fun.
Eugene, you and I have talked about this a bit. There was a clown who worked with Circus Knie, who became quite a legendary clown figure. People who are on stage generally don't get the kind of fame that movie stars do, of course. But in the world of mimes and clowns, this fellow figures large. His name is Dimitri, and I know he had a clown school with his family and continued performing throughout his life. He could do a solo theater show for 2 hours. Do you have any memories of when you were a child seeing Dimitri with Circus Knie, and whether he and your dad interacted, or whether your dad said that? Because I would think I've seen Dimitri and I knew Dimitri, and his work is on a very high level, and I would think your dad would have really appreciated and seen that.
My father liked him a lot. At the interval, at the circus interval, we were all invited back into one of the trailers. They had a press trailer, big trailer where all the VIPs would come and have a drink. And we would sit there, and Dimitri showed up and just shook my dad's hand. And, no memorable stories about it, but it was always, the nice thing, and that's what my father liked. It was always very simply done.
Thank you for sharing these memories, because these are things that all of us who love Chaplin won't have read in any book. I would like to move our conversation a little bit to Limelight before we open it up for all the participants to quiz any of us panelists.
Can I ask one more question before we move on? Just a small one.
Okay.
Before we get off. When your father, Eugene, went to get his Oscar in '71, do you have any memories of the buzz around all that, living in the house at that time?
Well, what I do remember is he didn't want to go. He was just didn't want to go. My father was always like, all the bad memories of his life, like the making of the circus, he just forgot about the film and about the circus and moved on. And what happened to him in America, in a way, it was behind him, and he just didn't want to know. And that's it. My mother convinced him. He did go, and what I do think it's a great thing that it was a great thing that Una managed to convince him to go, because that put his mind. He made peace with America during that time. So when he got back, all these issues he had about America and all were kind of forgotten.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Nigel and Eugene. So, on to Limelight a bit. In the circus, Charlie wrestles with obviously, as a character, with not so much fame, but being funny. That's very explicit about what is funny. When is he funny? When he discovers Myrna loves the tightrope walker and not him, he's not funny anymore, which puts another spin that Walter Kerr criticizes. He's criticizing because he sees it as a plot dilemma that Chaplin can't get into. I agree with you all. I think Kerr is overstating. In my opinion, the first 15, 20 minutes of the circus are unrivaled in anything he ever did. As a complete beginning of a film, I think it's the best he ever did, although many films begin in wonderful ways, but there's an astonishing amount of exposition in it if nothing else. That but he's simply a vagrant, peering in from the outside. He doesn't have any money, and by the end of the first 10 minutes, he is being chased along with another person by two cops in parallel lines, and ends up in a chase through the front house, and he's by this time stolen food from a baby. It's an amazing amount of exposition to establish how he gets to be a part of the circus by mistake, and why the audience and the people of the circus think he must be the funniest guy in the world, even though he's unaware of it. It's beautifully expressed, and then it moves into the rest of it. But I think the rest of it, I find the audition scene with the clown acts to be wonderful. Of course, it is the criticism that Charlie is a dunce could apply to any film, because he is alternately a genius at figuring out ways to get out of jams, and sometimes very dumb about getting into them in the first place because of his apparent inability to think out of the present and things. He forms habits.
I think as well is that my father, his genius was that he figured out, of course, the person, which is the little tramp. But in all these films, it's the little tramp who finds himself like in a new adventure. He's there. He suddenly goes. He appears in a circus, and what happens? Things. He tries to adapt himself to the situation where he finds himself. And all these films is in The Kid, the same thing, and all these films, it's the man is looking for his dignity and trying to adapt himself to his environment.
Yes, and I think it's one of the great examples. I heard on the interview your son conducted, Spencer, with the rock star Michael Cardelloni of Leonard Skinner.
Leonard Skinner, yeah.
He said he thinks he's been made a better person by watching Chaplin films. And one of the ways that I think Charlie is a great example on screen to all of us is his literally grace under fire. In The City Lights, as he's being ejected from the mansion, he somehow manages to get a couple of pieces of fruit to eat on his way down as he's being thrown out. As the cop is holding him in modern times, about to throw him into the paddy wagon, he somehow manages to get not only a cigar, which he gets the cigar store man to light for him, but to give some kids some candy and then throw it into. It's even in what in other films would be expositional scenes of being manhandled, he manages to find a little comfort zone, and it's a wonderful characteristic. In the circus, you can say it's about it's about being funny, and it's about visual comedy, because that's what we're seeing. It's a visual film. In Limelight, I think the emphasis is more about the fact of being famous and then not being famous, whether it's because you're funny or not funny anymore, or a good performer and not a good performer anymore. And again, I'm going to let Walter Kerr, in a much later, in an earlier thing than his book, The Silent Clowns, because he doesn't really talk about Limelight in The Silent Clowns, because it's not a silent film. He wrote one of the reviews of Limelight, and it ends with this, and he doesn't like the film. He says Charlie is being too preachy, and he's not doing what he should do, which is to make us...
Is Walter Kerr even a Chaplin fan? Everything we hear is negative.
Well, part of this is going to determine whether he's blacklisted at the end of our conversation. I don't know about you, but I'm going to write a letter to the Times, depending on our conclusions. So he ends his essay, which is called The Lineage of Limelight, because he is a Chaplin fan. As I said, a third of his great book, which is a great book, a beautiful coffee table book, and one of the best designed books, and one of the most insightful books, full of insights about Chaplin, Keaton, Lloyd, and others, called The Silent Clowns, came out in the 70s. But in his essay, which was published in a magazine in 1952, The Lineage of Limelight, he ends it by saying this: "There are wheels within wheels here," referring to how many self-referential things there are in Limelight. Like when he's discovered busking on the street, he says to his son, or whoever discovers, I think it's his son Sidney, playing Claire Bloom's love interest in the film, he says, there's always been there's always been something of the street in my nature. Something it's the tramp in me, I suppose. And Kerr correctly says that this is a wink, wink at the audience because he's not playing the tramp in Limelight. He's playing what he never was, a washed-up comedian. Although, in a sense, autobiographically in America, he was a washed-up comedian in the eyes of many people by 1952. It was the height of the McCarthy era, and he was a kind of unsung hero. But here's what Kerr says. There are wheels within wheels here, but it might have been better had they never been set turning. A profound clown, the greatest, most beloved we have, is seeking a second reputation as a sage. It is not likely to equal his first. So, I throw this out at the panel. Is Kerr right? Is Limelight a dismissible film? What's your sense of Limelight? Given the fact that, as you pointed out, Nigel, correctly, that these films look different to us every time we watch them. I mean, literally every time we watch them, but especially as the decades go on. I mean, I know how they've changed for me over the years. And the amazing thing, and I think you would attest to this, Eugene, as such a part of the family of performers that you've been, art, entertainment, comedy, nobody is creating it for the future. It's created for the present audience, for the present day. And when something continues to last, it's something of a miracle. And I think we would all agree that Chaplin's films are that kind of miracle. They're still funny. And sitcoms we watched as 10 years ago sometimes seem strangely dated when we watch. What were we laughing at? Why did America think Jerry Lewis was so funny in the 50s and 60s? And when we look at those films again, not so much for many of us anymore. So what do you think? Is Limelight a misbegotten exercise, or should those wheels have ever been set turning? And I don't mean the autobiographical elements, but is it a film that was worth making, and so on? Throw it out to you, and then we're going to open it up, I believe, to the hoi polloi out there, our attendees. Hello, everybody. I haven't forgotten.
Real fast, I'd like to say that I think it took a lot of guts for Charlie to make a film like Limelight that put a spotlight on his maybe insecurities about silent film and pantomime and all that in 1952. From what I've read, he didn't know what to do after Verdu. He wasn't sure if he was going to bring back the Tramp, which I still think he would have done a great job, but I guess he didn't think he was physically up to it at that time. But he could have made a very easy, Tramp-esque kind of film, but instead he decided to reach back into his past and do a real self-autobiographical reflection on his life and his career and what a lot of those performers from the turn of the 20th century were probably going through in the 40s and 50s. So as far as should the film have been made, absolutely. I mean, there's no question in my mind that it's not a fabulous movie. And like I said, it takes a lot of courage to do a film like that, to explore such dark, depressing thoughts in the back of the mind of a performer from that era.
Yeah.
I disagree with a lot of what Kerr says in that piece that you quoted, Dan. But one interesting idea that he has in there, it's always stuck in my mind. He said it would have worked better as a play, and I think it would. I kind of agree with that. I think Chaplin was really writing a play, and it would have probably been a better play than a film. And our mutual friend Ono has actually adapted it to the stage. I regret I've never had a chance to see it, but it'd be interesting to see how it would work. Chaplin did definitely have the desire to write a play at some point, and maybe it would have. Maybe it's not a misbegotten film, but maybe it should have been done in another medium.
Maybe if he had done that, he would have reverted to his working title, which was Footlights. Interesting point. Interesting geek point. Speaking of geek points, I would like to add my.
That's my cue. If you said geek, it's my cue. No, I just want to say, we have a critic here, almost criticism on Chaplin entirely from Kerr directly, and it's funny that you're reading it, Dan, because that's one of, well, a lot of negative reviews, and it could pile up, but the love for Chaplin is so great that it eclipses that stuff. But we can always talk and always talk, but it's almost irrelevant, Kerr's opinion, from what I'm hearing. And I think, is that what you're doing, Dan? Just shedding light on the irrelevant comments out there. However, it's thought-provoking. It does cause conversation, and it brings up a point about writing plays and more art. But should it have been made? That's a non-question. That's, again, goes right back to the genius of the artist himself. We don't get to choose, and we get to talk about it after. And we have to sift through all the other people that have other opinions about it, and then we get to disagree with them. And Charlie's far removed now at this point. It's the artist that I'm most interested in, and how it affected somebody negatively, not necessarily. It's affected people very positively. We've actually got somebody on the panel here, Rona Topaz, I've been reading through. She feels that it was somewhat of a life-changing film for her. She relates so deeply with it, and she wants to know something specific, and it goes more in line with the artist of Chaplin himself. What do you think he meant to do that? Was it a deliberate attempt to show that we can, as people, overcome other challenges that are put in front of us? So that is her question. I just wanted to say that out, because that's kind of the tone that I approach when I look at his films. Why did he make The Dictator? How's that affecting us today? Not at all, or an awful lot. And Limelight, just the same. So,
I had a school friend who watched Limelight. We were talking about it many years ago, and he said to me, "I really didn't like that film." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "You know, in that film, there's not one bad person. There's not a baddie." And I thought about it, and I said, well, maybe that's why I like it. Because it's one of those films, it's really about the human being. And it shows you all different values, which we tend to forget now. And especially now in these difficult times where artists are finding difficult to find jobs and whatever, because everything is closed. But let's forget about that. It's just that Chaplin was a big humanist, and his humanism shows in that film. Okay, so some people don't like it. Some people, because obviously from his very, very funny films at the beginning till his more political side films after that, of course, suddenly he talks about humanism and how to behave, and the impossible love and everything. Of course, it's a big change, so not everyone liked it, which I can understand.
And as a side note too, I was watching some of the bonus features on the Criterion disc, and I can't remember if I'd never read this before, or I just forgot that your mother is actually a stand-in in the film in a couple shots. And a part of me says, as great as Claire Bloom was, I would have loved to see a version of Limelight where Una played the lead with Charlie.
Well, the pictures, if you see Claire Bloom at the time, you saw my mother, they had a lot of similarities in their looks.
I'd like to interject here too, that of course, considering these two films makes it almost inevitable that we think about who the artist was making them, as well as what the film is showing us. But that ultimately, I would like to make the point, it doesn't matter what he was going through or how he grew up or what was happening. The only thing that matters is the film, the evidence of the film. Uh, I have a great fondness for Harold Lloyd as well. And when I turn people on to Harold Lloyd, I'm always tempted to tell them about his terrible accident where he's holding the bomb and it blew off half his hand. And he essentially has this much of a hand and his thumb and forefinger are missing because it makes it more impressive. But when you know that, you can't look at anything else when you're watching the film. It's a distraction. And I would say that these things are very interesting for those of us who love Chaplin because we want to explore all the facets of these works of art that have affected our lives so much, have made us better people. I think I can speak for probably most of all of us who are sharing this today. We feel that. But essentially, those biographical facts are probably ultimately not what really matters. What really matters is what we're seeing. At the time that The Great Dictator came out, the final speech was criticized in many quarters as a bunch of cliches. And the Chaplin newsletter that just came out from the estate has a Japanese dance group that is doing a dance to the final speech, the entire final speech of The Great Dictator, and they're doing this dance in a big garage, illustrating in almost sign language kind of thing the ideas of the supposedly cliche bromides in the final speech. And you see it afresh, and you're seeing how powerful those ideas are, because the idea of being kind to each other, the idea of which I think a lot of Chaplin films explore, what is the nature of love and how is it connected to self-sacrifice? These are bromides and cliches, as Hallmark cards, Valentine's Day cards are, that ultimately have at their core something very fundamentally important to all of us, which is why I think all of his films still hold up and speak to us. And Chaplin himself reacted to the accusation, which was frequent in his career, that his films were rather too sentimental. Walter Kerr, I have to say, has the best defense of that at all. He says there's no sentiment in Chaplin's films. They are powerful emotions that are evoked. And when there's sentimental, he feels the only sentimental scene in Chaplin's work is when he's walking past the saloon in the Gold Rush, the silhouette figure, and he's hunched over and he's sad because everybody has excluded him from the party, and he's been over there expecting the girls to show up, and they haven't. And he says it's a self-conscious shot, and sort of self-pitying and not worthy of his usual standard. As he says, is the scene after the great beginning of the circus, where he's asleep he falls asleep in the circus chariot, and everybody's looking for the funny man, and there's a title that says The Funny Man, and he says this is so meta. He doesn't use these terms, but it's meta cinematic work. It's obviously the funny man is the character, the Tramp, but the funny man is also the filmmaker who's making it, that we seldom become aware of when we're watching these films because we simply get so engrossed in the stories. And I think it would be a good thing to open this up to some of the questions that we have in our Q&A. If any of you have seen it, Hooman, if you've seen any of the questions that are worthy of being considered by our distinguished panel of supreme overlords.
Should we alternate between the Q&A and the live questions? Because we have a few people with their hands up too.
Oh, sure. It's your choice, Hooman, because you are the master, the behind the scenes.
Okay. Well, we talked to Alice. We have Bruce with his hand up, so probably he has something to say about Limelight. Let's see.
Nigel Bruce? I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Yeah.
Actually, Norman Lloyd is still around, but he's not dialed in.
Oh.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Hi there. I was particularly fascinated with all the insights and talk about the circus, and a few things come to mind. I wanted to sort of speak out while you were all talking about it. I think it's more and more for me. I mean, I love modern times, and it's probably always been. I always say that's my favorite film of all time. But the circus, I think, even more for me, more than the Gold Rush and even City Lights to some extent. I think it's Chaplin's most exquisite of all of its most mature and exquisite of all his Tramp character films. It's the most beautiful version of his costume and makeup. And pertaining to some of the stuff about including discarded footage or material that he was working on when he was waiting for the sets to be rebuilt from the fire. I feel that Chaplin was the perfect kind of like Beethoven or somebody who writes all this material and then is really almost draconian about cutting stuff. You know, he was so good at he'd work his tail off to get something and work on for a long time and then be absolutely just cut it. And those scenes for the circus, as interesting as they are, that sequence, it's sort of out of place. It's almost like a short in and of itself. If he had released it almost as a short, that's the way I actually feel about the City Lights opening sequence that was also revealed in Unknown Chaplin. I think that actually would have, he cut that as well, and that would have actually worked either as a short on its own or probably could have been included more so than the material in Circus. I think the Circus has 72 minutes is just an exquisite, perfect work. The one thing I wish he had included is that material that we got a very brief glimpse of in Unknown Chaplin, and I've always wondered about it. And then lo and behold, it turns out there's about 6 or 7 takes of him doing that bit of looking in the mirror and with the cane, taking the cane down and looking very forlorn, presumably after he's realized that Myrna is not interested in him. And that is just one of the most, to me, that is one of the most, if you had to take a single moment of all of his work in acting, that is just, you just show anybody that moment. And it's a scene that he discarded. He didn't use it. But to me, the fact that those takes exist now and we can study them and look at them, that is something I wish had been included in the final film. But the fact that it's not, we can look at those takes and just see what an exquisite bit of acting he did. And then again, just didn't find a place for it or didn't use it. But I think he was really good at the economy of being able to do a tremendous amount of work and go, nope, it's more is less, or rather less is more. It's going to be a better product, a better piece of storytelling, a better finished work if these are neat things and neat ideas. And more filmmakers could learn from Chaplin from doing that. We have these pictures that, I mean, some films deserve to be 3 hours, 4 hours if there's something really to be said or it works. But sometimes these films that come out that are 2-3 hours or 4 hours, and Chaplin knew how to really cut. So his 72-minute The Circus, I think, it far exceeds, to me personally, it's a better, more satisfying picture than the Gold Rush. I won't say that about City Lights. City Lights is just is its own exquisite masterpiece, as is Modern Times in its own way. But The Circus is, to me, I think, and it won an Oscar. It won the first Oscar for her. So it's anyway, I could go on and on, but that's just some things I wanted to interject about The Circus and how much I just love it and just think it's so wonderful on so many levels, and it just works on all cylinders.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce. Let's go to a written question. Marite has one for Eugene. She asks, if Charlie lived in these times, what would he be surprised most? What about the century would surprise him the most, and what would he not like? And what?
Everything. Everything.
Oh, I think he would. There's a lot of things he wouldn't like. Well, a lot of people ask me saying, what kind of film would it be done? You know, what would be his next film? And what I answer, it's just me thinking. I haven't, tell you the truth, I haven't a clue, but I would like to think maybe he would do a version number 2 of Modern Times, but instead of having the machines, you have the people with computers, the addiction to telephones and stuff like that.
Okay, let's see.
This is after The Freak would have been made, of course. Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I still think that would be a great film if it could be made today with the script. I remember reading something that was going to be attempted, but it's been a while since I've heard about that.
Yeah, well, I'm talking personally. I hope it never happens because no one else will be able to do it as well as my father, because he had the vision of it, like all these films.
Eugene, Rob Farr is asking a question I guess you hear a lot about that scene in Limelight that he initially cut out with the armless man. It did appear on DVD for a while when David Shepard put it out, but it's been removed again. And although it's available as an extra, and Rob is asking, should both versions be available or only the one with the scene removed?
Look,
I know it's a tough subject.
Look, what I just follow, I think I see my person. I'm just talking really personally. I see my father like a painter, and he does his painting. He puts his colors. He does whatever he wants with it. He can try, and he can put some person in a corner and then decide not there. Then people will say, oh, but why didn't he keep it there? I don't know, but I think whatever choice he'd chosen for is the right one.
And that's entirely your decision to make, a reasonable decision to make.
A lot of people saying, it's like people talking about the arrangements of his music, and they'll say, oh, but things should be different, or he was old then, and all. It doesn't matter. He did it like that. He put it out like that, so he was happy as it was. So don't put things into. I think what he wanted to say, what he wanted to show is done. Okay, if like the Gold Rush, he changed. He cut out the final kiss. In the later version, he had his reasons for it, but I'm fine with that.
You know what those reasons were, Eugene, by any chance?
No. Well, I heard many stories, but whatever. He hardly ever finished his films with a kiss, anyhow. So. I'm just talking as a spectator. To me, my father on the screen is another person, and I'm seeing it. I see him like that, and I see what he has to offer, and then I'm happy with it.
I've often read that he saw himself as another person on the screen too, and referred to himself in the third person. Did he ever do that in your?
Sure, yeah, no, but he said that in an interview. He said that the person now, especially in Switzerland, when he was putting the music to the film, the person on the film, he took a certain distance from it.
I think it's worth pointing out too, Eugene, that some of the last scores that he did, which include The Kid, first the Circus, and then I guess the next one was The Kid in the Idol Class, were fabulous scores. There's absolutely no sense that he was
A Day's Pleasure,
declining.
Payday, and all of those are great.
I do find it very interesting too that he decided to sing the theme song, "Swing Little Girl," for the title of the Circus. There's not another film like that where he decided to step in and actually sing the theme song himself.
Well, the only other song where someone is singing is in The Pilgrim, of course, Bound from Texas.
Mm-hmm.
There he found a singer which he liked and rendered the song as he wanted it. I know he did several editions for someone to sing "Swing Little Girl," and he didn't like any of them. So someone suggested to him, "Well, sing it yourself."
Yeah, that was Eric James who made the suggestion. He says he tricked him into doing it.
Any other comments out there that you want to?
Should we take a live question? We got let's see, we got Jay with his hand up. Let's see if we can bring him in.
Hi there. Thank you so much. This is fascinating, amazing. I'm going to go watch the films again as soon as we're done here. I have one comment and one question for Eugene. My question for Eugene is, I know that you've said, and I've heard your siblings say in interviews that your father, didn't talk about the past, didn't talk about what had gone on in the earlier parts of his career. I wonder did he show you or talk about the films themselves? Did he screen the films for you when you were young, or talk at all about them? That's my question. My comment is, since we're talking about circuses, I can't help but bring up the fact that many years ago, I saw your sister Victoria in her circus performance with her husband, and it was such a joy and a delight to see that performance, and a very different kind of circus, but really embodying so many of the same kinds of characteristics and emotions that your father did. Thank you.
Well, yeah, no, I totally agree with you about my sister. There is the Chaplin soul in their shows somewhere along the line. That's very true. Sorry, what was the first question?
The first question was, did he show you his films, his older films at all, or talk about them? Or was that, excuse me, part of the past that he just ignored when you were young?
Look, he never ever talked about his films. He talked about, once or twice, he talked about The Lion and how much he was scared, like in the circus, of course, the lion scene, and how much he was scared. And he was saying that to circus people, not especially to us, but to circus people. He said, look, I did that scene, and the lion did come straight up to me. He said, because he said, I was working with the monkeys before, and that's why the lion came up to me. He had the smell of the monkey, I had the smell of the monkeys on me. And that's the only time he talked about it. I remember asking him most of the time, like, in the labyrinth, the mirror labyrinth, how did you film that? You don't see the camera. And he would say, oh, I don't remember. I really don't remember. So, about his childhood, he talked about, he was in the workhouse and run by a Catholic organization. And he saw some street bum having a heart attack. And he said everyone was around him and pulling him around. And he said, I could see this guy looking at me, and on his face was, please leave me. He said, I could see he was saying, please leave me alone and die in peace. He said he died anyhow. So that's the only thing he really talked about, but I don't remember big discussions about anything else.
What was Eugene, why did he bring up the story of this dying street person?
I think we were talking about more like, I think it was at the dinner table, I remember very well, and I think it was more about the subject of if someone who's on the last minutes of his life, medicine should help him to live a bit longer or not.
Eugene, real fast, when the Robert Downey Jr. film was being put together, how involved were you in that? Not necessarily involved, but were you getting updates on everything that was going on? Did they reach out to you for opinions or suggestions?
Well, yes. Well, first it was my mother. My mother organized all that. There was pressure. There was a lot of demands of people wanting to do Chaplin films, Chaplin biography. And my mother always said to us, look, I never wanted this to happen, but I'm letting Richard Attenborough do it because he's a friend of the family's. And at least if we do one official one, the rest of the demands won't come, won't happen. So she, Richard Attenborough wrote the script several times, sent it to my mother. My mother read it. And critics, in that way, yes. And of course, before the film was finished, my mother passed away. So, but let's say the structure of everything, how it was supposed to happen, was already done and approved then.
Gotcha.
Eugene, Michael, your brother, says that he prefers Eddie Izzard's performance as your father over Robert Downey Jr. Do you agree with that? Eddie Izzard played Chaplin in The Cat's Meow, a Peter Bogdanovich film. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Okay, no, I didn't see that.
Okay,
No, I
so
didn't
we
see
can-
it.
Michael says Eddie Izzard really nailed Chaplin, in his opinion.
Yeah. Well, my opinion is no one has really nailed him.
No, definitely check out The Cat's Meow.
No, I don't. I mean, there's some good people out and all, but I think in general, I think there's a lot of people who have imitated him, and that's what bothers me. It's an imitation.
Yeah.
It's not taking the character further,
Of course.
which is very difficult.
Laura has an interesting question here. I think anybody on the panel can take a swing at this one. It says that Chaplin made, of course, many films during the last pandemic 100 years ago. And do we have any evidence that those conditions affected him or influenced him in any way, or made it affected his working conditions? Anybody have any thoughts on that? I haven't given much thought to that.
No.
Spanish doesn't seem to have affected his output at all.
Well,
No.
the film came out, Shoulder Arms came out basically as the pandemic came out. And so theaters, it was as now, many theaters were closed or they were restricted in how many seats could be in there. It doesn't seem to have affected the popularity, the enormous worldwide popularity of Shoulder Arms, though. So it's one of the things that was such a welcome thing during that difficult time, that it made its mark.
Eugene, Dominique is asking, do you remember your father reacting to the news of the death of Keaton or Harold Lloyd or Stan Laurel, and whether he read about it on the newspaper, on TV? Did he ever discuss the passing of these colleagues?
No, not at all. Not at all. He was, in a way, it's very strange. He didn't like funerals. He didn't like to attend any funerals. And I think he only attended one or two people's funeral in his whole life. But no, he didn't. I don't remember any stories about that.
I know that he got go ahead.
No, I just say, on another theme, I remember he was very affected by the assassination of JFK.
I know he got the news about Keaton's death when he was working on Countess from Hong Kong. His assistant director actually told him, and he had no reaction. He said, "Oh, thank you for that information," and he went right back to work cutting the film. He had no other reaction.
No, he was like that. It's true. Well, I don't know. He knew Keaton. He knew Stan Laurel. He obviously known, but I think he wasn't really close friends.
Yeah. Somebody else was asking about what their friendship was like, and I don't think they were. They knew each other, but they weren't close friends.
I think the two funerals he did attend were Sennett and Mabel Normand, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was at Doug Fairbanks' funeral as well.
That's right.
No, of course.
Yeah. He spoke at Fairbanks' funeral.
Yeah, well, Fairbanks was, I would say, his only friend, except Sidney, his brother. But it seems that his really close friend was Douglas Fairbanks.
I know Eugene in decades past, some of Charlie's earlier works were very difficult to see, and if they were seen, they were very, very poor quality. Since then, most all of his films, even the Keystones, have been restored, and they look about as good as they can look. Are there any of those films that you've seen in recent years that you really enjoyed or really thought had a lot of merit that you hadn't seen up until a couple decades ago, perhaps?
Look, a lot of people ask me what is my favorite films, which is a difficult thing, but I'm rediscovering all the early ones, and I love them. I love
Me
The
too.
Bank. I love The Bank. Not too long ago, I watched The Cure, which I think is absolutely amazing. All the early ones, I think they're really nice. The Pawn Shop.
Eugene, I have a question. Your dad always said that he really felt like an American, and about half of his life in America. And of course, by the time he moved to Switzerland, it was much more than half at the time in the early 50s when he came to Switzerland in order to make sure that you had a nice chocolate-covered place to be born in. And my question is, did you and your family celebrate Thanksgiving?
No, not at all.
Ah, well, then I have to explain. We had pilgrims here in America, and we celebrate the decimation of the native population by slaughtering a turkey, and that's what we'll all be doing, except it'll be virtual this week
Yes.
around the world. But I want to take that on that note of what is a beloved American holiday that is just a symbol of, your dad depicted that holiday so beautifully in The Gold Rush, of course, where Thanksgiving,
Of course, yeah.
a legendary film scene, and the sense of that we're all missing now of being together, being able to get together in physical reality is one that has a special meaning for all Americans, but now, of course, for all people in the world, because we're divided by the danger of the virus. But I want to say that this gathering of people who, many of whom I know out there, who are the participants as well as you panelists, has been very meaningful to me to be able to commune about this subject, and it's been such a very special treat to have you be part of it. And I want to thank you so much for joining us and allowing us to get to know you and talk about our favorite topic, all the Chaplin geeks. And I want to thank you, other panelists, Nigel Dreiner and Hooman Mehran and Jason Allin, and thank you for your comment, the wonderful film preservationist and my dear friend Bruce Lawton and his wife Alice Arts. And I'd like to wish you all a very, very happy Thanksgiving on behalf of the Niles Essanay Silent Film Museum. And I hope that when the time is right, that we can all meet there for a real Thanksgiving time to celebrate the great legacy that your father has given us. Thank you.
Oh, look, thank to all of you as well. It was fun. It was good.
Thank
I'll
you.
come back and I'll talk about the Swiss years next time.
Oh, great.
That would be great.
Good.